User management, projects, environments, and access federation. In this section, we're going to discuss the various access controls and methodologies that are implemented inside of the JFrog platform. We're going to start off with user management, of course. This is your basics. We're going to talk about projects, which is a way to organize your teams and also allow things like cross-team dependency sharing. We're discussing environments. These are environments of your SDLC, where it could be like dev and staging and production, and how you could actually assign controls around those and actually move builds and binaries and things like that between environments and apply access level controls to that. And then lastly, we'll talk about access federation. Access federation is a way for your organization to have multiple instantiations of the Artifactory product, or using our distribution portion of the platform and controlling the access level controls there also. So let's start off with, first of all, the JFrog platform itself with security features. It's role-based, so it has all the standard roles you would come to expect with any sort of product out there with the highest level of standards, especially in things like regulated environments. We offer things like password encryption, though password encryption is being more deprecated in preferred method for things like access tokens. So with access tokens, you can either create system-based tokens where you can go through and do things like scope tokens even, and also things like personal tokens, which comes in handy when you're using, say, a third-party solution or using the JFrog CLI or any sort of interaction you might want to have with a third-party tool. You can use an access token instead. It can be expirable, it could be infinite, it's all up to you. We also have SSO, and with the SSO portion of the platform, we have connectors to things like SAML, so you can use things like Ping Federated or Okta or one of those. We have OAuth, so all the standard OAuths like Google OAuth and other ones too. On top of that, LDAP, we can handle that, and we do things like Crowd and Jira. And when we talk about SAML, actually one of the nice features is if you are using, say, something like Ping Federate or Okta or even Azure DAFS, is that we also have SCIM support that allows that synchronization between the SSO provider and the JFrog platform. In addition, we have SSH authentication support too for things like GitLFS. You can use with our JFrog CLI. You can use RSA keys, public and private. Comes in handy for things like Alpine remote repositories. On top of that, client certification authentication with the CLI. It's amazing. We've put in all the areas of authentication because of the sheer diversity of the number of customers that we have. We have to make sure that we can attribute to all the ways in which they are actually implementing their role-based access controls. And saying that, you need to understand the entity model. We have users, and users belong to groups. We also have things like resources, which users can have access to specific resources like repositories and builds and release bundles. Destinations, what I mean by destinations means things like our distribution. We have distribution edge nodes, which you'll learn about later on. On top of that, if you're using our pipelines product, we have a whole section on pipelines, what parts of the resource or what kind of things they have access control there. On top of that, we have different types of permissions and permission targets. And we'll go through a couple of those in a minute. But the idea is that we have a fully role-based access control method across the board inside of the product. And it goes from Artifactory to X-Ray to our pipelines, down to our distribution platform, down to the edge nodes. JFrog Connect has its own set. So it's really a full offering. So the kind of permission levels we have, of course, things like read. We have stuff like annotate. Now, annotate, just so you're aware, is something I always encourage when you're using like a third-party tool, because remember, in an earlier discussion, we talked about metadata and the importance of metadata inside of the JFrog platform. And annotate allows people to add more, or tools to add more data to make everything more relevant. You can do things like deploy. So basically, it's like a write permission. We have delete and override. This is for things like making, maybe I might have something that's a unique build. You want to have unique builds every time, so you have to iterate through the permutations of the actual versions, or you can actually go ahead and promote things. In other words, you can either promote by moving or copying. So in other words, move will just move it from one repository to another. Copy will copy it to another. And remember, also too, with the checksum-based storage, it's a low-cost solution because we're just simply moving metadata. When it comes to our security product like X-Ray, you have the ability to go in and actually manage who has access to X-Ray. This comes in handy when you have security teams that might be different from the engineering team. You also have the manage functionality. It's not really an admin. It's actually more akin to when we talk about projects of being able to manage a small subset. So you don't get the entire, like almost root cause, root privilege, but it's more of a granular privilege. And then we have distribute and create. This is specific to our Enterprise Plus, where we have our distribution edges, and very specifically being able to distribute things like release bundles, or be able to go ahead and create things like repositories on those remote repositories. And then we have trigger. Trigger is a way for if you want to kick off a pipeline. This is another permission model. If you have the ability to go ahead and kick it off, in some cases with pipelines, you might want to do a manual trigger, or you might actually use a trigger with a third-party source, maybe like GitHub, where somebody checks something in and it kicks off a process to do the build. That's our CI tooling. But these permissions are built so that you can apply them to everything from repositories down to even individual binaries themselves stored in those repositories. So when I talked before, I talked about the fact that users, groups, and permissions were across the board. Well, one of the problems that we addressed not too long ago was the fact that having administrative rights to the platform, of course, can be dangerous. And on top of that, too, the excess burden of having a centralized person controlling all the access and things like that became tedious, especially for large organizations that have more than one team. So we came with JFrog Projects. JFrog Projects is actually an amazing component. So what it does is it allows a group and a company to create a project. And inside that project, they can have control of all their own resources, all their own users, their own permission models, their own, everything is there, even down to storage quotas. And the thing is it makes it easy to organize. And what's great is that it offloads all that system administration functionality down to a project admin. So like I said, they can invite their own people to the project. They can assign roles to their project. They can set, a storage quota to say, hey guys, you know what? We need to go ahead and clear out this bunch of these repositories because we're actually eating up a lot of space, or perceived space, because this is, actually the checksum-based approach. But still, you might want to do cleanup after a while. It makes onboarding so much easier because everything is consolidated down to that project. And one of the nice features of project that I really like is that this is great for things like even cross-team dependency sharing. One of the things that you can do is that if you have a repository, you could actually share the repository with other projects, and you could share it as read-only, meaning that they can include it in the way that they do their builds, add it into a virtual repository as part of the resolution order. And this allows for faster, more rapid, the increased velocity around things like cross-team dependency sharing. We also have environments. I discussed that a little bit earlier. It's basically role-based permission environments. With environments, it allows people to go in and organizations to say, I want to define my SDLC, my software development lifecycle, dev, QA, staging, and production. And this allows you to assign more granular control on who not only has access to specific repositories, but you can now flag and label repositories with environments and things like that, so that you could also now go even more granular to say, like, Bob has access to development, but he shouldn't have access to production. Or, Bob has access to development, but we don't want him to be part of QA, but we want him to be able to promote items into QA so that QA can test them. And environments allow you to go in and also pull information to say, how many things have we produced in development that have actually made it to production? So there's some quantifiable metrics that are behind that too, that you can extract from our logs or connect to a tool that can read the logs, like something like a Datadog or a Splunk. And you can get this kind of level of information. And the next thing we have is Access Federation. Now, Access Federation, I need to understand, this is for companies that purchase our Enterprise Plus platform. And with Access Federation, one of the cool features of this is that say you have multiple instantiations of our JFrog product, right? Artifactory with X-Ray and whatnot. We call it a JPD, it's a JFrog deployment unit. And then the thing is that with this allows you to have multiple Artifactory locations, both SaaS, managed, our managed solution, or hosted, or whatever, connect them together and synchronize the users, groups, permissions, access tokens across them, and manage everything from a single entity, or have more of a mesh style where you have everything kind of equal. It also allows global access controls, even down to the edge nodes, and it's very suitable for very large organizations or even geographically dispersed organizations, or things like CI tooling and other things too. And it can be set up in two different ways. You can either have a star-based topology, meaning you have a centralized location that dictates all the access controls to all the other locations itself, or you can even have a way for you to go ahead and mesh topology, where non-dependent on where you are, the users, groups, and permissions are all synchronized across all the entities themselves. So that's a quick overview of our user management, access federation, projects, and also to environments. Thank you very much.